When setting up a bedroom maker studio, every square foot matters. I want to put a shelf here, but the door opens inwards. Lucky for me, the door trim is mostly held on with paint. I'll just switch it back before I move out. I'll do it better than I found it. Easy enough, gained myself 30 inches of usable wall space. And that's where my little restoration project comes in. I found this shelf on the side of the road, a free pickup. It's dirty, paint's chipping, and it's not the size I want. It's about 16 inches deep, which does impede on my walkway coming into the room. But underneath the grime, paint, and old trim, it's some really nice old wood. I get asked pretty frequently where I get my scrap wood from, and a lot of it comes from pickups like this. Unwanted old furniture that's got good bones. A little bit of elbow grease and a lot of sanding, you've got yourself some good wood. Now, in this case, I'm labeling each joint so I can put it back together in the same way. Instead of taking this completely apart to use the wood on my own design, I'm planning to rebuild this original structure with some modifications. Regardless, it could use a tune-up. It's decades old by the looks of it, and it's been sitting outside for a few weeks. Definitely needs a good sand. Now, a lot of people might say this whole process is more trouble than it's worth. For the amount of work you put in, you might as well buy clean new boards without rusty nails in them. But personally, I like the extra grunge and history to old wood furniture. I also don't have new wood money. I'm not gonna lie and say this process isn't a bit tedious. There's upwards of 150 nails in this thing, most of them bent and rusty. But there's a degree of satisfaction in taking something that was on the side of the road destined for trash and breaking it down into parts that are useful again. With the whole shelf broken down into mostly nail-free pieces, it's time to get to work on my plan. Cutting all these boards straight down the middle. The plan is to take the one 16-inch deep shelf and turn it into two 8-inch deep shelves. Would be nice if I could do that without having to disassemble and reassemble the whole thing, but I don't have a 3-foot tall bandsaw. And this gives me a nice opportunity to resurface all the boards too. Now, when I'm sanding down pieces like this, I'm just going for a smooth surface. I like to leave the original layers of paint on. As you sand, it reveals the grain pattern. You can see the original wood, then a mint color it was painted, and then the white over top that. The summer and spring growth rings in the wood shrink at different rates over time. So in knocking down the high points, you reveal all the layers of paint underneath. Not the look most people are going for, but I like the uniqueness in each board. I started the reconstruction process on a live stream, taking my two halves and putting them together. So I'm using these to bridge and make the right height. I also decided to flip over the top and bottom pieces of each shelf half to make that painted wood grain pattern show up once the shelf is assembled. With the basic frame together, now I can decide where I want to put my dividers. I decided to do a staggered version of the original grid pattern to give myself some variation in the sizes of the final nooks. Building it this way also makes my fasteners more accessible since I'm putting this together with screws instead of nails. This way I can take things apart and make modifications later. The last thing for the basic structure is a little riser. I want this shelf's total height to match the one on the other side of the doorway, so I can bridge over some planks and store things up there too. I was planning to use 2x4s to make this little 6-inch riser, but all the ones I have are pretty warped. I decided instead to use these 2x10s I had laying around. I just need to join these two shorter ones to make one that'll span the whole width of the shelf. I usually don't join boards together, but this doesn't need any shear strength, it'll just be on the floor. And if I do it right, this should be way overkill anyway. I just sandwiched in some wood glue and drilled in some pocket screws to hold the thing together. Not the most beautiful process, no fancy joinery here, but it works. To get my little riser platform to the 6 inches I need, I fixed on some 2x6 scraps cut to 4.5 inches. I also put the tiniest bit of skew on these to make sure the shelf leans back. The finishing touch will be cutting a tiny bevel into these little protrusions. And with that, it's time for the old wood stain lottery. That was not stain, that was sealer. Should have read past the first line on the can. This one is definitely stain. It's not very liquidy, but it'll do the trick. I'm matching this thing up with a bunch of other ratty looking wood, so it really doesn't matter. To match the worn out painted faces on the main shelf, I decided to do the same thing on this one with some random bucket paint. Just me having fun making stuff look ugly. I let that dry and sanded it down a bit. It matches pretty well, I think. I like it. With the new hefty base screwed on, and the now split double-decker shelves fixed to each other, this thing feels incredibly sturdy. Even without any weight on it, it just doesn't want to fall forward. So with that, there's nothing left to do but unpack some things and load up this shelf. I've been really excited for something like this for a while. Between my 2 moves this year, a lot of my things never ended up making it out of moving boxes, and not having the space to properly organize out stuff that I know I have somewhere is a pretty big inconvenience. I can't tell you the number of times in the last few months I've been looking for some very specific material or tool and just been digging through my storage in the basement looking for it for way too much time. So finally having the breathing room that this shelf gives me is a very nice feeling. That being said, it doesn't have to all be function. I want this thing to look cool in my space too. I had 2 empty boxes left over, so I decided to cut it open and make some space for some lighting. I have this lamp that's been looking for a home for a while. It's made out of an old Chicago parking meter. It works too, which I think is hilarious. 5 cents for an hour, 10 cents for 2 hours. Wish those were still the rates. I took that offcut and turned it into a smaller shelf. I've got 2 more that I'll add in down the road as I iron out what's being stored in each box long term. Sometimes you have an idea and you try to find the materials to make that happen, but other times you let the materials dictate what you're gonna build. I am very pleased with how this thing turned out, but there's plenty more to do. Remember how I flipped the door to open the other way at the beginning of this video? Well, that got me thinking, why don't I just put my own door and then I can stick screws in it and make this a shelf too? No dead space in the studio, no wasted square feet. With this studio finally coming together, this place is feeling more like home than ever, and that just makes it easier to get more and more done, so it's full steam ahead from here on out. I will see you tomorrow, Friday, for a live stream, 5 p.m. EST, and shortly after that for another video. Thank you for your time.